Hello, today we will look at Northern Renaissance art and artists. The northern part of Europe, which let us say Germany could be one, and Flanders and the regions around the northern part of Europe. The Renaissance, actually the idea of Renaissance started in Florentine, Venice and the Italian part of Europe. But in the opposite side, in the northern part of Europe, Renaissance started little later with different kind of approaches. Though the ideas of Renaissance traveled, but we have to consider that it is not like it is a sort of an appendage, a sort of a supplementary history to the history of Renaissance. But Northern Renaissance, though it got certain influences from the ideas of Renaissance, as you know, Reformation and the ideas of rebirth and all. Here the material, I mean the basis or the changes that happen on the base of what the changes were happened, the base was slightly different. The available material of reference, the available material for inspiration were different, and the historical and political situations were different. So we have to consider those differences and how those differences sort of could be seen in the formation of a particular kind of a visual language, pictorial language. So if you look at the cities over there, the regions, like Bourges is an important place. Ghent was an important location of trade. Antwerp was also a very important place for Renaissance for us, and Brussels. And apart from these places, we have Flanders, we have Flames, we have other small regions. Naumburg is very important, from where Dürer comes, Naumburg in Germany. So also there was no Germany as such, as a territory, as a unified state. A country of Germany did not exist at that point of time. We have German centers, we have German cities at that point of time. So these separate cities, these were the places where artists have experimented in painting, and different kinds of experimentation took place. There was a sort of scientific interest, scientific approach, but which is very different from what we saw in the context of Florence as well as Venice or the Italian Renaissance. Here a sort of a medieval influence continues. The society was not radically restructured, but the society was still, the forms of social conduct was still medieval, to say. So these centers were really rich industrial centers and banking centers, and it allowed the large merchant class to flourish actually. So how industrial and banking centers flourish, what industrial and banking centers led to is the flourish of merchant class and the trade relations, right? And that created an ideal environment for the artistic production, because these merchant classes were actually patronizing the artists, like in the context of Florence, where the business class, the banking classes and the merchant classes were patronizing artists for paintings and architecture. Here also a sort of growing merchant class, which happened slightly later, slightly delayed, but the merchant class, the flourish of this, the merchant class, the evolution of merchant class led to the patronage of art production also. At the same time, we also have these kings, dukes, who were very influential in artistic patronage, right? Unlike in the context of Florence or Venice or Milan, these were city-states in terms of political structure, but in the context of Northern Europe, they were still in the structure of aristocracy. It was still a feudal structure, a continuation of medieval political structure and the social structure, unlike the Italian context, where the Italian context was more like city-states. The political structure was city-states, not like the northern part, which was more under the feudal structure. So, if we look at the inventions, invention of printing press was very important here, and in the northern part, and particularly the German centers, regions, where printing was experimented with, so mechanical reproducibility was, the techniques of mechanical reproducibility, that which is nothing but printing, was really invented here. So you have printing press was invented by Gutenberg. Again, Gutenberg comes from Germany. So for artistic purposes, they have invented woodcuts and engraving. Engravings are a process where you create image on a copper plate. At a later point of time, now we use zinc plates along with copper, but copper was extensively used. And once you make an image on the copper plate or on the wood cut or wood engraving, on the wood, and you can have number of images of same picture. Okay, so you can reproduce it. You can make hundreds and hundreds of images of the same image, copies of the same image. So this started at this point of time, and along with this image, due to the printing press, they could print the text. So the text and image went together, and which led to the production of books and expansion of education. So this is a very important invention at that point of time, and formation of a merchant class of art patrons and purchased works in oil on panel. So the merchant class largely was patronizing artists to paint in oils. So oil medium, which was invented in the northern part of Europe, in Flanders and Flames, so that got a big patronage at this point of time. So oil painting flourished, So oil painting was invented at this point of time, and it got a very good patronage. And in terms of political and religious reformation, we have Protestant Reformation, and it is in German, actually it is in Germany, where Martin Luther started this, questioning the authority of press, and from where you have Protestant Reformation started. And what he did was, he sort of printed, he sort of laid out a number of around 90 or so, a number of points, critical points, criticizing, questioning the authority of church, and he nailed it in the University of Nuremberg and other places and on the churches. So this was possible because these were like pamphlets, that could be circulated. So these were circulated, and circulation was possible because of the printing press. So you see how a particular technology led to the spread of information and spread of criticism towards the authority of church, and that led to the spread of Protestant Reformation, right. So this was a very important religious reformation that also influenced the artist and artistic practice. So apart from this, you have an international trade. So these urban centers were also centers of international trade, and that led the circulation of money, circulation of economy, and circulation of different ideas about culture, about economy, and circulation of goods. Different materials could be circulated, right. So as I said, oil painting was invented in Flanders, and lately it was adopted in Italy. Right? It travels from Flanders, from northern part to the Italian part. So when we look at Italy, Italian Renaissance, as we have seen, was inspired by the classical antiquity, right. It was a sort of a revival of classical antiquity, unlike the northern part. So they emphasized on the classical forms and the revival of the classical forms in terms of the body type, in terms of the light and shade, and in terms of the philosophy also. When you look at, let us say, when you look at the northern Europe, in northern Europe, change was driven by the religious reformation, right. where we have seen the Protestant Reformation started here, and that led to the questioning of the authority of church and to the return to Christian values. I mean, Christian values means people started believing in the Bible, believing in the scriptures, what was written in the Bible, but not on the authority of church. So they returned to the values of Christianity, and by doing that they revolted against the authority of church. Right? This was a very important political as well as the religious sort of reformation. And as I said, along with the merchant class, you also have princes and kings patronizing the artists. So this was a sort of a situation. This was a situation in northern part of Europe during the Renaissance time, and it was a continuation of medieval treatment in terms of painting. The attention to details. So if you look at the northern Renaissance painting, these paintings are really detailedly painted. You have a lot of details of dress, of jewelry, of the interior objects. So the paintings show a very intricate treatment of different objects, which is very different from, let us say, the Italian Renaissance, right? A tendency towards realism and naturalism, right? But less emphasis on classical ideal. It was not about idealism. It was not about ideal form or ideal landscape like we have seen in Leonardo or Raphael. It was about ideal landscape and ideal beauty and certain kind of an ideal form. But here these artists were more interested in the observation, in the realism and in the naturalism, what they were observing, and to show that exact naturalistic appeal, naturalistic appearance in their painting, right. So they were interested, when you look at the aspects, different elements, they were interested in landscapes. We see landscape forming a background to the larger narrative, and more emphasis was on middle class and peasant life. We see artists were showing interest in peasant life and the middle class life and their material life and their activities and their interests. And we see a very detailed representation of domestic interiors, right. Unlike the Italian context, where we don't see much of a detail of the interiors, we have architecture being used, but the detailed nature of the architecture we don't get to see over there. Here we see through the architecture, through the interiors, we see a reflection of the class, which does not happen in the context of the Italian Renaissance. And portraiture also was practiced at this point of time, and with a very fine skill, right. And if you look at this comparison that you have on the screen, comparison between Italian Renaissance and the Northern Renaissance, if you look at the subject matter, and this will really explain the difference. If you look at the subject matter in the context of Italian Renaissance is classical mythology and religious scenes. When it comes to Northern Renaissance, it is domestic interiors, portraits and religious scenes. Religious scenes are common. And if you look at the style is symmetrical, balanced, good sense of mass and linear perspective, right. These were very important. We have seen in the context of Leonardo, Raphael, that symmetry was very important and balance was also very important. And the sense of mass and volume, if you look at Michelangelo, we can see that even Raphael, there is this sense of volume and mass, and of course linear perspective was something that was very important for the Italian artists. But when it comes to Northern Renaissance, you see that there is an attention to surface detail, attention to naturalism, not idealism, but naturalism, the detailed representation of nature. So that is the difference. It is not about symmetry, balance or whatever, or the sense of volume, but it is more about this very immaculate detail. And what is it known for, famous for? Figures with mass and volume, knowledge of underlying anatomy. So anatomy, and we have seen Leonardo and other artists were also Michelangelo. Michelangelo used to dissect bodies to know what is the anatomy inside of the body. So this was very important. Volume, knowledge of anatomy and mass were very important when it comes to Italian Renaissance. In the context of Northern Renaissance, it is the detail, it is the minute surface detail, but not the knowledge of anatomy. Anatomy comes little later when Dürer starts experimenting with anatomy. So media, what kind of media they used? In the context of Italian Renaissance, you have fresco, tempera and oil. You have three mediums. You have number of frescoes painted by Leonardo, Botticelli. You have all the artists you take from Giotto to the later high Renaissance artist to Raphael. They have used fresco extensively. That was the fundamental medium at that point of time. Also tempera on wood, and oil comes little later from the northern part of the Europe, and oil on wood panel initially, and at a later point of time they started using canvas. And when it comes to the northern part of Renaissance, northern Europe, they used oil extensively, right? Apart from tempera on paper largely and tempera on wood before oil, they have used oil extensively, and as I said, oil really got patronage at that point of time because of the mercantile class, and oil on panel was very famous, and you have many examples. And if you look at the artists, just for an example, you can take Michelangelo and creation of Adam, let us say, on Sistine Chapel, where the God and the Adam were sitting, and how the Adam was created by the touch of God, and the kind of expression and the kind of volume, the kind of mass and the gravity that you see over there is different from what you see in Arnolfini's wedding portrait by Jan van Eyck, and we'll see the painting little later. The kind of detail, the kind of immaculate detail and the domestic ambience was captured very well, right? So let us move to the paintings now. So we have sort of discussed a sort of overall situation, historical, political and the artistic situation, which forms the ground for the paintings that we are now going to look at. So this is a painting by Robert Campin. Robert Campin was one of the early masters of Northern Renaissance, and this painting is a panel. It's an altarpiece, Merode altarpiece. An altarpiece, as I said, altarpiece is kept in the altar of the church. So you can close it. It is painted on both the sides most of the times. If you close it, you will get one image. If you open it, you will get another image. Sometimes the narrative continues from outside to inside, and sometimes you have two different stories relating to the life of Christ. So if you look at this image in the center, you look at the center panel, it is called triptych. Triptych is something you have three panels joined together. They are connected, but they are at the same time separated by the frame. In the terms of narrative, they are connected. So if you look at the center image, central panel within the triptych, you have an angel and you have a lady who is sort of reading something, and you have a table in the center, and on the table you have a book which could be Bible, and just behind the table you have a sort of a flower pot in which you have lilies, right? So lilies is symbolic of fertility, and if you look at the interior is, and of course the scene is Annunciation. Annunciation is the theme where angel comes and announces Virgin Mary about the birth of Christ. And you see angel is coming from the left and she is sitting, but Mary is engaged in reading, and reading is something that you get to see represented in Northern Renaissance. So reading culture, as I said, because of the invention of printing press, reading culture really flourishes at this point of time, and book is something that we get to see repeatedly represented in most of the paintings. So here Mary is reading, she is sitting in this ambience which looks like a middle class house, and you have a fireplace, she is sitting on a bench, and you have a fireplace right behind the bench, and you can see the soot, the black soot of the fireplace. The fire is not burning, but it may not be winter at this point of time. So we get a sense of season also. So the fire is burning, the fire is not burning, but the soot is there, and you go back, the detail representation of architecture could be seen. You can see the window and you go out of the window, there is a sort of a cloth that is hanging, and you go out and you can see the clouds. So, this kind of a detail is very important when it comes to Northern Renaissance. So, looking at this painting and the center frame, we do not get to see the perspective that we get to see in the Italian Renaissance, because these artists did not follow the scientific perspective. They have followed a sort of an arbitrary commonsensical perspective, right. So, if you look at the kind of detail and particularly look at the figure of Mary in red garment, we do not quite get the sense of anatomy behind the garment, right. So, we get a sense of figure, but we do not get the clarity of how she is sitting, how the legs are folded, or the other details of the anatomy, which we get in the context of the Italian Renaissance. So, here they were not very much interested in the details of anatomy or the perspective, but they were more interested in the details of the interior. And you can see here the towel hanging at the back, you have a Gothic niche. So, that is very interesting, Gothic niche. We do not get to see Gothic arches or Gothic niche or Gothic architecture represented in the context of Italian Renaissance. Here, as I said, the medieval forms continue, and Gothic is a medieval, late medieval form of architecture. So, you see the Gothic niche is very much there represented on the wall, and opposite to that on the other side you have a very clearly treated, very intricately treated window, right. So, you see this kind of an intricacy, and you can see the roof also, where the wooden roof is very much clearly painted. So, these are the characteristics, and we can see these characteristics continues to reflect in the later artists also. Let us look at the right panel, where somebody is making a sort of a with sort of wood pieces, he is making something. Basically, he is making rat traps, because you can see at the window back you have a rat trap placed for the display, right. And you can see each and every detail is very well laid out here, very intricate treatment of objects. Basically, this is Joseph, who is engaged in his job, because Joseph, the father of Christ, was a carpenter. So, you can see basically here the workshop of a carpenter with all his tools on the table. He is drilling holes into that wood piece, and you can see the other objects that a carpenter has in his workshop, and through the window at the back you can see the street, the street of the city that Robert Campin must have seen. So, it is all these detail is very important when it comes to the northern painting, the northern Renaissance painting. And on the left panel, the two figures that you see are basically the patrons, and the patrons are waiting. It is very interesting to see how these two panels are connected, where you have the angel already sitting there, and then she just announced, and maybe it appears as if these patrons are waiting for the angel go away, and then they will, so it as if they and they will come later, as if they are waiting for the appointment of Mary. I mean, it is a very interesting sort of a composition and the connection that the artist makes between these two panels. And at the back, if you look at that left panel, at the back you have an attendant waiting for these two patrons. So, look at the architecture at the back, and how the detail plays a very important role. And yeah, if you look at this close up, you can see the details very much clearly in this close up, and the city life at the back, and also the age, also the for example, the age of Joseph here, right, and all the details of the tools, the nails, and the light is also not very flat, not very uniform, the kind of light that we see in the context of the Italian Renaissance. Yeah, next let us move to the other painting by Robert Campin again. This is Virgin and Child. So, we have the same kind of a treatment here. Here you have, it is more like a mother and child, right? A mother is more, is like caressing, is loving her child, and she is sitting at the fireplace, right? The fire is burning. So this tells us about the time, the season, and the wood pieces, and you have a garment or a cloth is hanging on that sort of a rod, or the wooden rod or whatever, it's hanging from the roof. And you can see all the details of this. Maybe this is a sort of a, she's not sitting at the table, she's not reading, but she's holding the baby and she's loving this baby. And you have a sort of a basket, some maybe napkins are kept. So it's more like, the secular theme. It's more like any mother and child. But here, because you have Robert Campin painting halos, the rays, the divine rays behind their heads, it makes them to be called Virgin and Child, the Christ. So you can see here also the kind of detail, the roof, the wooden roof, and you also have a window through which you can go out and look at the landscape outside. So this is very important, and also you can sense an idea of class here, unlike the earlier painting where the Annunciation panel in the center, where Virgin Mary was reading and you have a table, and the entire ambience tells us about the class, a sort of a upper middle class of the society. Here the way she is sitting and the ambience tells us that she is a lower set of class, lower category of class from what we have seen in the last panel. So we can see by these details, we can sense the kind of classes, the kind of class structure, and the kind of interiors of those classes that existed at that point of time. And let us move to the next painting. Where it is by it is by Jan Wynaik. Jan Wynaik is the artist who invented oil painting. He is the artist who is credited with the invention of oil painting. And this is a very important painting. It's a very famous painting called the Portrait of Giovanni Anulfini and his wife. This is basically a wedding portrait, where this painting is done during the wedding of Anulfini. Anulfini was an Italian merchant, very wealthy merchant, and he got married quite late. So it is this moment when he got the painting. He asked Van Eyck to paint this. It's more like a wedding photograph that we have nowadays. But this painting is not just a simple documentation of a wedding scene or documentation of them standing like that, but there are a lot of symbols here. For example, the orange on the left side, right, just at the window, the orange tells us about the fertility, the whole orange. And you have the dog down there. The dog is a symbol of fidelity. And where you have the woman is wearing this green gown, and a very elaborate green gown, which is again, the green is again the symbol of fertility and flourish. And she appears as if she is pregnant, but these are speculations. We don't know. It could be and it could not be also. And you have two slippers represented on the bottom left. It appears as if this is a more sacred ritual kind of an event where you're not wearing slippers. So these symbolic implications are there, and you look at the way Arnolfini is holding the hand of his lady, and then how he is showing one hand like this. It's a gesture which is very mysterious, little curious gesture, and the way he's standing. So it all kind of tells us that it is not just a matter of documenting a moment of marriage, but it is more than that, which has more symbolic meanings embedded into it, and the color and the ambience. And because Arnolfini was a merchant and a wealthy merchant, if you look at the ambience is very wealthy. I mean, it looks very affluent. The bedroom, and you look at the bed, the elaborate bed on the right side, right behind the woman, you see his wife, you see it's a very wealthy bedroom, right. So, we have seen three different paintings now, and we see that how class could be seen represented, not very evidently, not directly, but the way the scene is composed, the way the figures are set in the ambience itself tells us the kind of class they belong to, right. And if you go back and you can see a very beautifully painted chandelier, and you have candles kept on it, and one candle is still lit and another candle is extinguished. This is again a symbolic suggestion about the transience of life, you know. So, there are symbolic meanings embedded in these different motifs that 𝗳𝗏𝗍 painted. And you have a mirror right in the center, and it is a concave mirror, and you have a detail over there, and in that mirror we see the back side of this couple, and then you have the artist shown himself. So, artist was witnessing this event, and the text that shows on the top of the mirror, convex mirror, it says that 𝗳𝗏 was present here. That means he was witnessing this. So, it's a complex painting, it's not just a matter of wedding, or it's just not just a matter of portrait. So, this complexity also exists at that point of time. Let us move to the other painting by 𝗳𝗏. This is a painting called The Virgin of Chancellor Rolling. Again, oil on wood, and this also tells us, this also shows us, and we have seen three paintings along with this, we have seen three paintings where Virgin Mary was represented, and Virgin Mary and Child in two paintings. So, if you look at this, this is again a lavishly painted ambience, right. You see Rolin, the figure on the left side is the Chancellor Rolin himself, and Rolin asked 𝗳𝗏 to paint in this painting. And Rolin was an influential chancellor of Burgundy, and he was very wealthy also, and he was also like he patronized artists, but also he did some philanthropic activities, like he established a hospital, right. And in the hospital also you have 𝗳𝗏 painting the Last Supper. Last Supper, there is a painting called Last Supper, 𝗳𝗏 painted in that particular hospital. So, Rolin was a very influential figure in Burgundy, and also wealthy. He became very wealthy after he became chancellor. So, he was very influential, and that wealth and that power and that importance could be seen here in the way his dress is represented, right. If you look at his garment, and so lavish a garment and so detailedly painted, very intricate, immaculate detail that you can see, which is different from, let us say, the red, very gorgeous looking red garment of Virgin Mary, right. And you have a crown, as if this crown is brought by Rolin. It appears as if, you know, we can read, we can say that you know, the angel is placing this very lavish, very intricately treated crown on the head of Virgin Mary, right. So, these two figures, Virgin Mary and Child, are placed on the right side, and on the left side you see Rolin praying his regards to the Mary, right, and he is definitely holding a book. So, he is not just someone who is wealthy, but he is also a scholarly person. So, if you look at the carpet, if you look at the floor, how intricately it is painted, and look at the character of each and every material, how the artist has captured, and you can, after looking all this, you can look at the ambience of the interior, right, of the space that they are sitting in, and gradually your eye goes back into the landscape right outside this interior, right. After the balcony, you have a bridge over there, you have two persons are standing in the center, and one of them is wearing a red turban, and that could be 𝗳𝗏 himself, like he painted himself. So, those two persons appear like merchants or traveling people or maybe traveling merchants. So, red turban is something that was very popular at that point of time, and it was a dandy, it gave a dandy look to the people. So, they were looking at the river in front of them. So, this is this, and the landscape that you see and the river and the landscape that you see, it was the landscape of Burgundy at that point of time. So, you see he is representing the Netherlandish landscape, the actual accurate Netherlandish landscape, and this is what is naturalism. Right? This is not idealism. It is not an ideal mysterious landscape that you saw in Leonardo or Raphael, the clear ideal landscape, but here it is a particular observed and very detailedly documented kind of a landscape. So, this is the difference in the approach towards landscape. So, it is a very important painting, and it is a very beautiful painting which captures both the interior and the outside. It also explains us about the power and the wealth of Rollin, who appears to be having access to these divine figures, Mary and Christ, right. So, it is a very beautiful painting that one needs to spend time on and look at the details. And apart from the paintings, there were very elaborate tapestries produced at this point of time, and the Duke of Burgundy, because he used to kind of travel around and he used to kind of occupy and he used to conduct regularly wars. But so, because they used to travel, they needed material that could sustain the travel. So, tapestries was one of the material, one of the techniques of creating images, and tapestry is a weaving technique through which you create designs and images, and the artists that the weavers of these tapestries were so skillful, and they could create such beautiful, very naturalistic images in tapestries. So, tapestry was a very evolved form at that point of time, and we have number of tapestries coming from this time period, and this is one of the examples of the tapestry that you are seeing on the screen, and it shows the scenes from the Passion of Christ. So, basically the crucifixion and removal of the body of the Christ from the cross, and the entombment, and all that, all the subsequent events after that. So, it is very very detailedly produced, which is almost equal to painting, and it is very awe-inspiring. And let us move to the other painting by another artist, who Roger van der Weyden. Roger van der Weyden is also another important artist along with Jan van Eyck. They were contemporaries. So, this is a painting which shows the descent from the cross, where Christ is taken down from the cross, and it is a very interesting composition where this is again a panel, a wooden panel, oil on wood again. It is a wooden panel, maybe an altarpiece panel, where so you see how it is not an entirely rectangular composition. You have a small niche that is created right in the center where the cross is shown, and you have a figure taking down the Christ, right, the figure of the Christ. This is very interesting, where the space, that particular space is used in the composition very interestingly, where the cross is placed. So, the body of the Christ is occupying the central focus in the composition, and he is taken down, and you can see the gravity, the weight of the dead body. It is not the body that is lively. So, the gravity and the weight of the dead body is shown, and the same gesture of the Christ, the same posture of the Christ's body is represented also in the posture of the Mary, right, who is, it is the same body type, it is the same, it is the same posture. So, they almost echo, they almost like look similar in terms of the posture and in terms of the placement, right. And this painting is also, if you look at the details, for example, the tears are shown, there are these details very intricate details are shown and the tears are painted, and this is very interesting where you don't get to see such details in the context of Italian Renaissance, and this is possible because oil allows such detail to be brought out, and the kind of emotion, right. So, the intense emotions could be shown, and they were trying to show these intense emotions, where the divine Christ, those themes, the divine themes were represented through the emotions, the human emotions, where the Christ becomes, the stories of Christ becomes very emotional and narrated through the human experiences. So, the stories of the Christ are narrated through the human emotion and human expression, which is very unique to the Northern Renaissance. So, let us move now to the another painting and another artist. This is a very fantastic artist, Hieronymus Bosch, and fantastic also in literal sense, because he created images, he created compositions which were really fantastic, which were not naturalistic but more imaginative and more symbolic, and he had his own symbols, he had his own stories, he had his own moral approaches and his own symbolic cryptic sort of stories that he represents within his compositions. And this is a painting that you see, it is a triptych, again 3 panels, and it is Last Judgment. In the center you have the Christ sitting right in the top, and he is judging the sins of the people. So, in this painting you see that activity of judgment is happening, and people are judged for their sins, and they are put into the heaven according to their life, according to their story, according to their history of their life in the earth, on the earth, and they are put to heaven on the left side. You can see heaven on the left side, which is more pleasant. It is like a garden, and you have, it's green and it's more pleasant, right. It's pastoral, and you have a beautiful kind of feel when you look at it. So, on the right side it is hell. So, all kinds of activities are happening. You have punishments, you have different kinds of punishments, and how nobody knew how the hell would look like, right. I mean, Bosch did not die and then come back from death. He did not see hell. So, hell was imagined, and hell was a sort of an imaginary construct. We think that there is hell and all these punishments are going to be there, where people are put into boiling oil, or people are pierced with different kinds of things, and all kinds of imaginations. And similarly you have imaginations about heaven, where heaven is beautiful, you have gods, you have angels, you have good food, and all the pleasures. So, these imaginations were basically created by the artist. Like here, Bosch has really opened up the entire the grotesque, the gory imagination about the hell, and you can see that on the right side with all grotesque looking creatures, and he created those creatures himself out of his imagination. And you can see the same thing in the next painting, where look at this painting, Bosch, it is called the Garden of Earthly Delights, right. So, which is not, it is again the same concept, where you have the Garden of the Earthly Delights in the center. Again, this is a triptych. Hieronymus Bosch is a painter, and he was a sort of a pessimist. He had a pessimistic view of human nature. He was very negative towards the human nature, and that shows in his paintings, and that shows the internal dark sort of a pessimistic approach towards human nature could be seen in his paintings. And he was very wild and very lurid in terms of his imagination, and you can see that wild and lurid imagination in his paintings. So, in the center you have the Garden of Earthly Delights, I mean the earth, where you have people are engaged in pleasures and different kinds of sensual pleasures, and material pleasures and all grotesque kind of things were happening. And on the left side it is more calm, maybe this is heaven, this is more like the godly kind of ambience. It appears as if this could be heaven, where maybe this is Adam and Eve that are sitting and you have God in the center. So it's like Eden, you know, it's like the godly ambience which is more beautiful, which has a sense of, which looks like earth but it is more pleasant, which is not like, you know, these earthly delights are not there. On the right side it is a grotesque ambience again. You have all these grotesque kind of creatures, and Bosch created these grotesque creatures, and very surrealistic, and surrealism in the 20th century, surrealist artists were very much influenced from Bosch's paintings and his imaginative kind of creatures. So he created his own creatures, he had his own stories. So all those stories and that cryptic pockets of stories are lost now, they were not written, but we have these fantastic images that are left by Bosch. Now we can move to another artist who is called Albert Dürer, and Dürer belongs to Germany. What is Germany now? He was born in Nuremberg and he traveled extensively. So from the northern part of Renaissance, Dürer is the one who is very influential, who is very important to understand to understand the combination of both the Renaissance. Now he is the one who sort of learned different things from, you know, the northern part of Renaissance painting as well as the Italian Renaissance, because he traveled extensively, right. So he was one of the early artists who was very self-conscious about his being an artist, and he was very self-conscious about his mind and intellectual capacities. So he was also very prodigious. I mean, you look at this particular image, the slide you see, where on the left side it is a self-portrait done by him when he was 13 years. Imagine, he did this self-portrait when he was 13 years, right. And this is a self-portrait on the left side which looks like a Christ. He painted himself as if he is looking like, as if he is, you know, he appears like Christ. You know, the way he is holding the hand gesture and the face, the elongated sort of vertical sort of face, and the way the hair is falling. So all this sort of could be compared to the appearance of Christ. He made it to look like Christ, and this he painted at the age of 28, and by this time he was very skillful, he was very self-conscious about his own appearance, and he did several self-portraits in different kinds of you know, appearances. And he is the first artist who created a monogram for himself, a sort of logo, and you can see that on the left side of his portrait, on the left side of this oil painting, he created this A and D, which stands for Albert Dürer. So he is the first self-conscious artist, and he also created his own market, and he is also the first artist, one of the first artists who used prints, who used engravings, and he used printmaking extensively, and that led to the expansion of his popularity, and he was also one of the very popular artists of his time. So if you look at this next slide, he was a scholar, he was also a scholar. I mean, he had this scholarly temperament as well as an artist, and very good an artist at that. And he was patronized by the Emperor Maximilian. So this patronage played a very important role for his explorations, both within the practice as well as, you know, in terms of traveling around. So he travels to different places and learns from there. And he also wrote books on geometry, fortifications, and human proportions. So this is very close to what we see in the Italian Renaissance, where artists were also trying to write books on different themes, right? Architecture, perspective, geometry, human proportions, and Leonardo is one of the examples. And he was very much influenced from the Italian Renaissance also, like Italian artists also, because he also visited Italy several times. So he was a very self-conscious artist, and you have a self-conscious individualism of Renaissance seen in his portraits, right. You can see in his portraits there is this self-consciousness, which was slightly different from, let us say, the Italian artists, even the high Renaissance artists, where they did not paint themselves, right? They did not paint self-portraits. They have painted themselves in the part of the narrative somewhere. Michelangelo has painted in Sistine Chapel himself. Different narratives they have placed themselves. Raphael has painted himself in the School of Athens. But Dürer is the artist who painted his portraits, self-portraits. So this shows about his self-conscious individualism. So he was born in Nuremberg in Germany, if you look at the details, and then he traveled to Italy, right? He traveled to Italy when he was not when he was not even 28. If you remember that portrait when he painted in 1500, that was 28 years. So he traveled to Italy in almost 5 years before that, and you can see how self-consciousness, a sort of a self-conscious individualism of being an artist, a sort of a holistic artist, the complete artist or a complete man. That idea that he got to taste, that he got to know from the Italian context, right? And we have seen that in the context of Italian Renaissance. And he went to Italy again, let us say, after 10 years, right? And he stayed there for 2 years. So he traveled to Venice and Florence and Milan and of course Rome, and he had seen all the dilapidated architecture and the fallen monuments of Rome, and we can see all that experience reflecting later in his paintings, right? And he went to Netherlands, and the kind of Netherlandish luminosity of color comes later, and he traveled in 1520. So these journeys, the journeys really helped him and his evolution as an artist. And if you look at this slide, the next slide, if you look at this slide, you will see that the influence of volume and the volumetric treatment, the kind of roundness of the form, roundness of anatomy, it comes from the experience of his travels in Florence, in Venice maybe. So you can see that here, and here it's a very interesting painting where Christ among the doctors, and look at the doctors, the clinical practice was emerging at that point of time. The doctors were conducting dissections of the dead bodies, to know the anatomy and how the body functions. Before that, this knowledge did not exist. Just during this time, the anatomy was understood, and the clinical practice, the doctors' specialization was started. And they were holding books, because of printing press that we talked about, and the knowledge becomes very important. So Christ here is not looking like a divine figure, but Christ here is looking like an intellectual. He's looking like, participating in this discussion among the doctors, something about the body or about some disease or whatever. And the hand gestures that you see in the center is very curious. They are kind of engaged in some kind of a sharing of knowledge through these, hand gestures. And they appear very curious. Unlike the earlier paintings that we have seen of the other artists, here you have different expressions, the expression of curiosity, expression of, thinking. So we have different sort of expressions which has something to do with mind and knowledge, right? So it is very interesting, and this also tells us about the kind of history, the kind of engagement of people with different sort of ideas. And let us move and look at the other painting. This is a different painting which is a theme of Bible. This is Adoration of Trinity, of the Trinity, and we have seen, if we have seen the Florentine Renaissance, you have seen Trinity painted by Masaccio, right? It was a fresco, and this is the Trinity by Albert Dürer. And this is a very interesting composition where you have a sort of a V, a sort of a inverted triangle that is forming in the top, where you have a crucifix you have Christ being crucified, and that image, and right behind the Christ you have the image of the God, holding the cross, sort of a thing, and you have clouds, and on either sides you have attendants, you have apostles, you have divine figures, and over on the top you have a pigeon on the top, and you have angels, right. So this is forming a sort of a trapezium, right, on the top, and that is sort of coming down, and you have a slightly made arc. It's not a straight horizontal, but you have a slight arc, right. So it sort of welcomes, the kind of triangular sharp angle that is coming down, it is held by this arc. So formally it is a very interesting composition, and if you look at the color looks like being influenced from, let us say, the Venetian color. Dürer's paintings become very bright, the color becomes very bright at a later point of time after his travels to Italy, because of the influence of Venetian painting, and we know that Venetians were fantastic colorists. They used bright colors, vibrant colors, and that influences Dürer. We can see that reflecting here, and also later his color gets influenced from the travels that he did to Netherlands, right. So here you have on the left side you have the donator, the person who actually patronized it, Landeur, right. Matthias Landeur was there right in the center, kneeling in that golden robe, right, and you have other important figures on either sides. So this is the kind of painting happens at this point of time where the patrons were shown, like remember Chancellor Rollin was shown in that painting. So whoever sort of patronizes, his image, his portrait comes along with the theme of the Christ, that may be Virgin Mary and Christ, that may be crucifixion, whatever. So within the frame where the Christian theme is represented, within that you have the image of the patron also gets represented, and that is because of the patronage, and that also explains us how the patronage and the patron artist relation was working at that point of time. Let us look at the other painting by Dürer. This is 4 apostles, and the 4 apostles of Christ are 4 evangelists, John, Peter, Mark and Paul, and he painted it in 1526 after all his travels at a later point of time. And the remarkable quality of this painting is the kind of drapery that you see, the heaviness and the weight of the drapery, and this heaviness and the weight of the drapery is reminiscent. It reminds us of, let us say, Michelangelo or Leonardo or Raphael, the high Renaissance artists. It is very much the Italian Renaissance kind of drapery that we see here, and the kind of anatomy, the kind of expressions and the kind of treatment of color, right. And let us look at his books. He produced several books, as I said, on geometry, on human proportions, on other things. So this is an example of his illustrations of human proportions, and this is the kind of anatomy that reflects in his later drawings also. So he also produced several copperplate engravings, something like this. This is a copperplate engraving, and you can see the same kind of anatomy being used here, and such copperplate engravings were produced in numbers. And he also designed the cover pages of his books. So he was popular not only as a painter, but he was popular also as a engraver, as a printmaker, and was a very important artist of European art. Now let us move and look at this painting by Hans Holbein the Younger, right. This is called the French Ambassadors, right. So this painting is very curious when you look at it. Look at the way he is painting each and every detail, and the way he is painting the materials, right, the garments, and all the objects that are placed in the center are the objects collected by these ambassadors, but related to the travel. You have a globe, you have a compass, you have all kinds of things related to travel. And it's a very fantastic painting, and how the material culture could be seen in this painting. So, what is the legacy of Renaissance painting? You know, feel the whole Renaissance painting. It is in the context of art. It is realism. It is secularism. You know, towards secular turn. It is the vernacular. Vernacular means the local. You know, you can see each and every region has its own vernacular local qualities, and humanism. You know, there's a shift from the intense belief that is specific to the Christianity and the church practice, and that belief reflects, or that gets shown through the human experiences, and the humanism is very important. And when it comes to society, you have printing spread ideas, literacy rate went up, new discoveries of maps, charts, and other discoveries. People began questioning the religious structures and the political structures, right? So these are the important things to keep in mind when we look at the Renaissance painting, and how they lend to the formation of visual languages of the artist. Thank you.